The white lace dress felt like a noose around Zelda's neck as she stood alone in the church vestibule, staring at the empty pews that should have been filled with well-wishers celebrating her marriage to Richard Montgomery, the most prosperous banker in Hecla, Montana territory, but instead held only pitying glances and hastily whispered gossip as the entire congregation realized what she had been too blind to see until 30 minutes ago. Her hands trembled as she clutched the wilted bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself that morning, back when the summer of 1883 had seemed full of promise rather than humiliation. The traveling preacher stood uncomfortably near the altar, shuffling his worn Bible from hand to hand, clearly wishing he could disappear into the floorboards. Zelda's Aunt Martha had already fled to the back room, unable to watch her niece's public destruction any longer. Richard Montgomery had not arrived. More than that, he had sent his clerk, a nervous young man named Timothy, to deliver a hastily scrawled note explaining that he had reconsidered the arrangement and would be departing on the morning train to San Francisco with Miss Caroline Winters, the daughter of the mine owner, whose fortune far exceeded anything Zelda could bring to a marriage. The note had been clinical, almost business-like, as though he were declining a loan application rather than abandoning a woman at the altar. Zelda was 21 years old, orphaned since she was 16, and had been living with her aunt and uncle for the past 5 years while working as a seamstress to contribute to the household. Her uncle had made it clear that once she married Richard, her room would be needed for her cousin's growing family. She had nowhere to go, no savings of her own since every penny she earned went toward household expenses, and now no future husband to provide the security that women of her era desperately needed to survive. The church began to empty slowly, families filing out with their children, women clutching their husbands' arms and thanking God it was not them standing in Zelda's worn boots. She remained frozen in place, unable to process what came next. The dress she wore had taken her 3 months of late nights to sew, each stitch representing hope for a better future. Now it was just fabric, expensive fabric she could not afford to have wasted. "Miss Zelda," the preacher's voice was gentle, "perhaps you should sit down. I can fetch you some water." She shook her head, her dark hair beginning to slip from the careful arrangement she had spent 2 hours creating that morning. "I am fine, Reverend. Thank you for your time. I apologize for the inconvenience." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, too calm, too measured, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. The Reverend opened his mouth to say something comforting, then seemed to think better of it and simply nodded before gathering his things and leaving through the side door. Aunt Martha returned, her face blotchy from crying, though Zelda suspected the tears were more about the scandal than genuine sympathy. "Come along, Zelda. We must get you out of this dress and back to the house. People are talking, and the longer you stand here, the worse it becomes." "What will happen to me?" Zelda asked quietly, her aunt's expression hardened slightly. "We shall discuss that at home. Your uncle is not pleased. The arrangement with Richard was meant to secure your future, and now everything is complicated." The walk back to her aunt and uncle's small house on the edge of Hecla felt like a funeral march. The town was not large, perhaps 300 people on a busy day, and news traveled faster than wildfire through dry grass. By the time they reached the weathered front porch, Zelda knew that every person in Hecla would know she had been jilted. Her value in this community, already diminished by her orphan status and lack of inheritance, had plummeted to nothing. Uncle James was waiting in the parlor, his face red with anger. 3 months I gave you notice that you needed to be settled. 3 months, Zelda. I have 5 children of my own to feed, and your cousin Sarah is expecting her 4th. We cannot continue to house you indefinitely." "James, perhaps this is not the time," Aunt Martha said weakly. "Then when is the time?" He turned his attention back to Zelda, who still wore the wedding dress, feeling ridiculous and exposed. "That banker made a fool of you, and by extension this family. I have already lost business because people associate us with scandal. You have 1 week to make alternative arrangements." "1 week?" Zelda's voice cracked. "Uncle James, where am I supposed to go?" "That is not my concern. You are a grown woman. Find work that provides lodging, marry someone else, go to one of the larger cities where you might find opportunity. I do not care, but you cannot stay here." The finality in his voice struck her like a physical blow. Aunt Martha wrung her hands but said nothing in Zelda's defense. The 5 children, her cousins ranging from ages 3 to 14, peeked around doorways with wide eyes, sensing the tension but not fully understanding its source. Zelda turned and walked up the narrow staircase to the small room she had occupied for 5 years. It was barely large enough for a bed and a small trunk containing all her worldly possessions. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in the wedding dress, and stared at the wall. No tears came. She felt hollowed out, as though Richard had taken not just her future but her ability to feel anything at all. The next 3 days passed in a blur of humiliation. Zelda inquired at every business in Hecla about work with lodging. The general store did not need help. The hotel had no positions available. The saloon owner offered her work but made it clear what kind of work he expected, and Zelda walked out before he finished his proposition. The schoolhouse already had a teacher, and the church had no funds for additional staff. She considered the ranches surrounding Hecla, but most were family operations that hired men for cattle work, not women with no experience in ranching. The few that did employ women wanted cooks or housekeepers who could live in the bunkhouse, but those positions were already filled. On the 4th day after her aborted wedding, Zelda sat on a bench outside the general store, trying to determine her next move. Her uncle had been clear that her week was nearly up. She had $12 saved from sewing work she had done privately, which would buy her a train ticket to Butte or perhaps Helena. But then what? She would arrive in a strange city with no connections, no lodging, and winter would come in a few months. Montana winters could kill the unprepared. "You look like you are carrying the weight of the entire territory on your shoulders." The voice was masculine, warm, and unfamiliar. Zelda looked up to see a man she had not encountered before, though that was not unusual. Cowboys and drifters passed through Hecla regularly, stopping for supplies before moving on to wherever work took them. This man was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. His clothes were dusty from travel, and he wore a well-maintained pistol on his hip, which was common enough in Montana territory. "I apologize for my appearance," Zelda said automatically, though she had dressed in her most practical calico dress that morning, knowing she would be walking around town making inquiries. "Nothing to apologize for." He gestured to the bench. "Mind if I sit?" "Been riding since dawn, and my legs could use a rest." She nodded, and he sat down with a sigh of relief, stretching out his long legs. Up close, she could see he was probably in his mid-20s, with hazel eyes that seemed genuinely kind rather than calculating. A small scar crossed his left eyebrow, giving him a roguish appearance despite his polite demeanor. "Name's Emmett O'Brien," he said, extending his hand. She shook it briefly. "Zelda Reynolds. Pleased to meet you, Miss Reynolds. I am new to Hecla, just hired on at the Double R Ranch about 10 miles north of here. Came into town for supplies and to get a sense of the place." "It is a small town," Zelda said neutrally. "Not much to know." Emmett studied her for a moment. "Forgive me if I am overstepping, but you seem troubled. I do not mean to pry, just offering an ear if you need one. Sometimes strangers are easier to talk to than folks who know your business." Perhaps it was his kindness, or perhaps it was the desperation of her situation, but Zelda found herself telling him everything. The wedding that never happened, Richard's betrayal, her uncle's ultimatum, her failed attempts to find work and lodging. The words poured out in a rush, and Emmett listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That is a rough situation," he finally said. "This Richard fellow sounds like he did you a favor by showing his true colors before you married him, but I understand that does not help your immediate problem." "No, it does not." Zelda looked down at her hands, work worn from years of sewing. "I have 3 more days to find a solution, and I have exhausted every option in Hecla. What about the ranches? Most of them need help in some capacity." "I have tried. They either have no positions or no lodging for a woman alone." Emmett was quiet again, then said carefully, "The double R might have something. Boss mentioned needing help in the main house. His wife passed 2 years ago, and his daughter has been trying to manage cooking and housekeeping for the ranch hands while also caring for her younger brothers. Boss was talking about finding someone to help lighten the load." Hope flickered in Zelda's chest, fragile as a candle flame in wind. "Do you think he would consider me?" I could ask. "Cannot promise anything, but it would not hurt to try." He stood up, settling his hat back on his head. "I am heading back to the ranch this afternoon. If you want, you could ride out with me, meet the boss and his daughter, see if it might work out. I do not have a horse. You can ride with me. My horse is strong enough to carry 2 for 10 miles. Zelda hesitated. She barely knew this man, and accepting a ride alone with him would normally be improper. But propriety seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. Her options had narrowed to this single opportunity, or boarding a train to an uncertain future in a city where she knew no one. "Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. I accept your offer. Call me Emmett." "Mr. O'Brien makes me sound old." He grinned, and for the first time in days Zelda felt something other than despair. She returned to her aunt and uncle's house to collect her trunk and inform them she was pursuing a position at a ranch. Her uncle looked relieved and did not ask many questions. Aunt Martha packed her some bread and cheese for the journey, a gesture that was more about assuaging her own guilt than genuine care. But Zelda accepted it graciously. By early afternoon, she was seated behind Emmett on his sturdy bay horse, her trunk tied securely to the saddle. The ride to the Double R Ranch took them through beautiful Montana landscape, rolling hills dotted with pine trees and the occasional herd of cattle grazing in the distance. The summer sun was warm but not oppressive, and a light breeze kept the temperature comfortable. "How long have you been a cowboy?" Zelda asked, partly to make conversation and partly because she was curious about the man who had shown her unexpected kindness. "Most of my life," Emmett replied. "My father had a small ranch in Wyoming, but we lost it when I was 17. Bank foreclosed after a bad winter killed most of our herd. Since then, I have worked on various ranches throughout the territory, going where the work is. That must be difficult, never staying in one place. It has its moments, but it also has freedom. I answer to a boss for my daily work, but beyond that, I make my own choices about where I go and what I do." He paused. "Though I will admit it can get lonely. Most cowboys are not much for conversation beyond cards and drinking." "You do not drink." "I drink on occasion, but I have seen too many men ruin themselves with whiskey. My father was one of them. After we lost the ranch, he drank himself to death within a year. I decided I would not follow that path." The honesty in his voice touched something in Zelda. I am sorry about your father." "We all carry losses," Emmett said quietly. "The trick is not letting them define everything that comes after." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Zelda found herself noticing small things about Emmett. The easy way he sat in the saddle, clearly at home on horseback. The gentleness with which he handled the reins, communicating with the horse through subtle movements rather than harsh commands. The respectful distance he maintained, making sure she felt safe despite the intimate necessity of sharing a horse. The Double R Ranch came into view as they crested a hill. It was larger than Zelda had expected, with a substantial main house, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals containing dozens of horses and cattle. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, and she could see several men working near the barn. Emmett guided the horse toward the main house, where a man in his 50s was sitting on the porch, mending a bridle. He looked up as they approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Emmett, you are back early. Thought you would spend more time in town. Found something more important than supplies, boss." Emmett dismounted and helped Zelda down, then retrieved her trunk. "This is Miss Zelda Reynolds. She is looking for work, and I remembered you mentioning needing help in the house. Figured it could not hurt for you to meet her." The rancher stood up, setting aside his work. He was tall like Emmett, with graying hair and blue eyes that were shrewd but not unkind. "Samuel Rogers," he said, extending his hand. "Folks call me Sam. You are welcome on my property, Miss Reynolds." "Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. Let us go inside. My daughter Lily should have coffee on, and we can talk more comfortably there." The interior of the house was clean, but showed signs of being managed by people with too many other responsibilities. The furniture was well made but dusty. The floors needed scrubbing. The curtains were faded from sun exposure. It was the home of men who worked from dawn until dusk and had little time or inclination for domestic details. A young woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 19, with her father's blue eyes and blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too much work and not enough rest. "Lily, this is Miss Reynolds. Emmett brought her from town. She is looking for work, and I thought we might finally take you up on your suggestion about hiring help." Lily's face brightened immediately. "Oh, father, truly. Miss Reynolds, can you cook?" "Yes, and clean so and manage a household. I have been doing so for my aunt and uncle for 5 years." "Can you cook for 20 men?" Lily asked, and there was desperation in her voice. "Because that is what we need. 20 ranch hands who eat like they are starving, 3 times a day, plus my father and my 3 brothers. I have been trying, but I cannot keep up with everything. The house is falling apart, and I am so tired I can barely think straight." Sam Rogers looked uncomfortable. "Lily, perhaps let Miss Reynolds sit down before you overwhelm her." They settled around a large wooden table, and Sam poured coffee while Lily sat down across from Zelda, studying her with hopeful eyes. Emmett leaned against the door frame, observing but not participating. "Here is the situation," Sam said. "My wife Elizabeth passed 2 years ago from pneumonia. Since then, Lily has been trying to manage everything her mother used to do, but it is too much for one person. We need someone who can handle cooking for the crew, managing the house, and helping with laundry and other domestic work. In return, I can offer room and board, plus $20 a month." $20 a month was fair wages, and room and board meant security. Zelda felt the tightness in her chest ease slightly. "Where would I stay?" "There is a room off the kitchen that used to be for hired help. It has a bed, a dresser, and a window. It is small but private." "When would you need me to start?" "Tomorrow, if you are willing," Lily said quickly. "Please, Miss Reynolds. I know this is sudden, but I am drowning here. I love my family, but I cannot do this alone anymore." Zelda looked at the three people watching her. Sam seemed honest and straightforward. Lily was clearly at the end of her rope. And Emmett, who had brought her here, had kind eyes that made her feel like perhaps the world was not entirely cruel. "I accept your offer, Mr. Rogers." Lily let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and reached across the table to squeeze Zelda's hand. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Sam nodded, looking relieved. "Welcome to the Double R, Miss Reynolds. Let me show you to your room so you can get settled. Supper is in a few hours, and I will introduce you to everyone then." The room off the kitchen was indeed small, but it was clean and had everything Zelda needed. More importantly, it was hers. She had privacy, security, and work that would earn her wages she could save. It was not the future she had imagined 4 days ago, but it was a future nonetheless. That evening, she met the 3 Rogers boys. Thomas, who was 15 and already working full-time on the ranch. Benjamin, who was 12 and helped with chores while still attending the small schoolhouse in Hecla when it was in session. And little David, who was 8 and full of boundless energy. They were polite boys, well-raised despite the loss of their mother. She also met the 20 ranch hands who worked the Double R. Most were cowboys like Emmett, ranging in age from late teens to grizzled men in their 50s. They were rough around the edges but respectful, clearly pleased that someone would be taking over cooking duties from Lily, whose skills in the kitchen were limited at best. After supper, which Lily had prepared and consisted of barely edible stew and rock-hard biscuits, Zelda understood why everyone had looked so relieved at her arrival. She helped Lily clean up, learning where things were kept and what supplies were available. "I am not a good cook," Lily admitted as they washed dishes. "My mother tried to teach me, but I never had the patience for it. I would rather be outside working with the horses than standing over a stove." "Everyone has different talents," Zelda said diplomatically. "What matters is that we do what we are good at." "What are you good at?" Lily asked curiously. Zelda considered the question. "I am good at making things work, taking what is available and creating something useful. I had to be growing up with very little." "I think you will fit in well here," Lily said with a smile. "Everyone on this ranch is good at making things work. We have to be, living this far from town." Over the next few weeks, Zelda settled into her new life. She woke before dawn to start preparing breakfast for the crew. She learned each man's preferences and dietary restrictions, made sure the coffee was always hot and strong, and prepared meals that were filling and flavorful despite the limited ingredients available. She cleaned the main house until it shone, organized the pantry, mended clothes, and generally brought order to the domestic chaos that had reigned since Elizabeth Rogers' death. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way her previous life had not been. She was not dependent on charity or a husband's goodwill. She earned her wages through her own labor, and those wages were hers to save or spend as she chose. Emmett was often around, as his duties included breaking horses and training new mounts for the ranch. He was patient with the animals, never cruel, and Zelda found herself watching him work when she had a spare moment. There was something compelling about his quiet competence, the way he seemed to understand what a horse needed before it even knew itself. He also made a habit of stopping by the kitchen after his work was done, ostensibly to get coffee, but often staying to talk while Zelda prepared supper. Their conversations ranged from trivial to profound, and she found herself looking forward to those moments more than she wanted to admit. One evening, about 6 weeks after her arrival at the Double R, Emmett found her sitting on the porch after she had finished her work for the day. The sun was setting, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink that took her breath away. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Please do." He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cooling evening air. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset. "You seem happy here," Emmett finally said. "I am," Zelda replied, surprised to realize it was true. "I was so focused on what I lost when Richard left me at the altar that I did not see it as an opportunity until you offered me one." "I did not offer you anything," Emmett said. "I just gave you a ride. You earned this place yourself. You showed me kindness when I needed it most." "That matters more than you might think." He turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. "Zelda, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "When I saw you sitting on that bench in Hecla, looking like the world had ended, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. I wanted to fix it for you. I wanted to make things better." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Over these past weeks, getting to know you, that feeling has not gone away. If anything, it has grown stronger." Zelda's breath caught. "Emmett, I know it has not been long. I know you went through something terrible just weeks ago. But I cannot help how I feel, and I do not want to hide it. You are the strongest, most capable woman I have ever met. You took a situation that would have broken most people and turned it into something better. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. Zelda had thought she understood what love felt like with Richard, but that had been based on security and convention rather than genuine connection. What she felt when she looked at Emmett was entirely different. It was the warmth that spread through her chest when he smiled. It was the comfort of his presence, even in silence. It was the knowledge that he saw her as she truly was and valued her for it. "I thought I was not ready for this," she said quietly. "After what happened, I thought I would need years to trust anyone again, but you are not Richard. You have never treated me as anything less than your equal. You listen when I speak. You respect my opinions. You make me feel seen in a way I have never experienced before." Zelda. Her name was a question on his lips. "I love you too," she said, and the words felt like coming home. "I have been falling in love with you since that first day, when you offered me hope instead of pity." Emmett reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. The gesture was simple but profound, a physical manifestation of the connection they had been building over weeks of conversation and shared space. "I do not have much to offer you," he said. "I am just a cowboy with no land of my own and no grand fortune. But I can promise to work hard, treat you with respect, and love you with everything I have." "That is more than enough," Zelda replied. "I do not need grand gestures or wealth. I need someone who sees me as a partner rather than a possession. I need someone who will stand beside me, not in front of me or behind me." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Then I am yours if you will have me." "I will." They sat together as darkness fell, hands clasped, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. It was not the future Zelda had planned 6 weeks ago, but it was infinitely better. She had found not just security but genuine love, not just shelter but a home where she belonged. The next morning, Sam Rogers noticed the change between them immediately. He was a perceptive man, made more so by years of managing a large operation that required attention to detail. When Emmett and Zelda exchanged a smile over breakfast that lasted a moment too long, Sam caught it and understood. Later that day, he approached Zelda in the kitchen while she was preparing lunch. "Miss Reynolds, might I have a word?" "Of course, Mr. Rogers. Is something wrong?" "Not at all. But I wanted to ask about you and Emmett. I have eyes, and I see how things are developing between you two." Zelda felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I apologize if we have been inappropriate. I assure you that nothing improper has occurred." Sam waved away her concern. "I am not accusing you of anything. Emmett is a good man, one of the best hands I have ever hired. And you have brought life back to this house in ways I did not realize we were missing. I have no objection to you two forming an attachment as long as it does not interfere with your work. It will not, I promise." "Good. Then you have my blessing, for whatever that is worth." He paused, his expression softening. "My Elizabeth and I met when she came to work as a housekeeper on my father's ranch. I was a young cowboy then, not much different from Emmett. I know what it is like to fall in love with someone while working side by side every day. Some of the best marriages start that way, built on friendship and mutual respect." "Thank you, Mr. Rogers. That means a great deal to me." He nodded and left her to her work, but his words stayed with her throughout the day. Sam had essentially given them his approval, which meant they did not have to hide their growing relationship or worry about losing their positions. Over the following months, Zelda and Emmett's relationship deepened. They stole moments together whenever possible, sitting on the porch after supper, taking walks around the ranch on Sunday afternoons when work was lighter, talking about everything and nothing. Emmett told her about his childhood in Wyoming, the joy of growing up on a ranch despite their poverty, the devastation of losing it all. Zelda shared memories of her parents, gone so long now that they sometimes felt more like stories than real people, and her difficult years living with relatives who saw her as a burden rather than family. They also talked about the future. Emmett had been saving his wages for years, dreaming of buying his own land someday. Zelda had her savings as well, growing steadily now that she earned wages. Together, they began to imagine what life might look like if they combined their resources and their dreams. "There is land available north of here," Emmett said one Sunday in late September as they walked through a meadow ablaze with autumn colors. "Nothing fancy, maybe 160 acres under the Homestead Act. We could file a claim, build a cabin, start small with a few head of cattle." "That would take years of hard work," Zelda pointed out, though her heart was already embracing the vision. "I am not afraid of hard work, are you?" "No," she smiled up at him. "I think we could do it. I think we could build something real together." Emmett stopped walking and turned to face her fully. The wind caught his hair, and the afternoon sunlight made his hazel eyes look almost gold. "Zelda Reynolds, I do not have a ring to offer you right now, and this meadow is not exactly a church, but I cannot wait any longer. Will you marry me?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Yes." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was nothing like the chaste, obligatory kisses she had shared with Richard during their brief courtship. This was fire and tenderness, passion and promise, a physical manifestation of the love that had been growing between them for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Emmett rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this right," he promised. "I will buy you a proper ring, and we will have a real wedding with your friends there to celebrate." "I do not need a fancy wedding," Zelda said. "I just need you. You deserve better than being left at an altar once. I will make sure the second time you walk down that aisle to a man who is waiting for you, a man who would rather die than let you down." They returned to the ranch hand in hand, and that evening they announced their engagement to the Rogers family and the ranch hands. Lily squealed with delight and hugged them both. Sam shook Emmett's hand and kissed Zelda's cheek, welcoming her officially into their extended ranch family. The Cowboys cheered and offered congratulations, with several of the older ones making jokes about another bachelor falling to domesticity. That night, lying in her small room off the kitchen, Zelda thought about how drastically her life had changed in just 4 months. In June, She had been preparing to marry a man she thought she loved, a man who saw her as a convenient acquisition rather than a partner. Now, in October, she was engaged to a man who truly valued her, who wanted to build a life with her based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Richard Montgomery had done her a favor by abandoning her, though she would never thank him for the humiliation he had caused. But that humiliation had freed her to find something real, something worth having. The wedding was planned for late November, after the fall roundup was finished, and before winter set in hard. Emmett bought her a simple gold band with a small garnet stone, which Zelda treasured more than the finest diamond. They would marry in the same church where she had been left waiting months earlier, but this time would be different. This time, the groom would be there, eager and committed. Zelda sewed herself a new dress, not white this time, but a deep blue wool that would be practical for everyday wear after the wedding. She had learned her lesson about impractical romantic gestures. This dress could be worn to church on Sundays, to social gatherings, and eventually would be saved for special occasions as she moved into ranch life with Emmett. The Rogers family helped with preparations, with Lily particularly enthusiastic about planning a celebration dinner after the ceremony. The ranch hands pooled their money to buy the couple gifts: a set of cooking pots, warm blankets, tools for building, practical items they would need when they eventually filed their homestead claim. 2 weeks before the wedding, a stranger rode up to the Double R Ranch. He was well-dressed, riding an expensive horse, and he asked to speak with Miss Zelda Reynolds. Zelda's stomach dropped when she recognized him as Marcus Montgomery, Richard's younger brother. She received him in the parlor of the main house, with Sam Rogers present as a chaperone and silent support. Marcus looked uncomfortable, turning his hat in his hands. "Miss Reynolds, I apologize for appearing unannounced. I came to speak with you about my brother." "I have no interest in anything concerning Richard," Zelda said coldly. "I understand, and I do not blame you, but I felt you deserved to know what happened, and to receive what is rightfully yours." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, which he placed on the table between them. Richard's engagement to Caroline Winters lasted less than a month. Her father discovered that Richard had been embezzling from the bank, covering his theft by manipulating accounts. Rather than allow a public trial that would have damaged his own business interests, Mr. Winters arranged for Richard to be sent to San Francisco, where he is currently working in a warehouse under an assumed name, essentially exiled. Zelda felt nothing upon hearing this news, which surprised her. She had expected anger or satisfaction, but instead she felt only indifference. Richard was not worth her emotional energy, Marcus continued. "Before Richard left, he had purchased wedding gifts for you, items that should have been yours. I brought them." He gestured toward the door, where several boxes were visible on the porch. "There is also the matter of your dowry. Richard convinced your uncle to contribute funds toward your marriage, promising they would be used to establish your household. Those funds were never used for their intended purpose, and I am returning them to you." He pushed the envelope across the table. Zelda opened it to find $200, a small fortune that represented years of her uncle's savings. She had not even known he had contributed anything toward her marriage. "This is mine," she asked, "legally and morally. Richard had no right to keep it once the engagement was broken. I have also prepared documents stating that any debts or obligations you might have had toward my brother are null and void. You owe the Montgomery family nothing." Sam Rogers spoke for the first time. "That is honorable of you, Mr. Montgomery, especially given that your brother's actions brought shame to your family name." Marcus nodded. "My brother made his choices. I cannot undo the harm he caused Miss Reynolds, but I can at least ensure she receives what is rightfully hers." He stood, preparing to leave. "Miss Reynolds, I wish you well in your future endeavors. I understand you are engaged to be married soon. I hope this marriage brings you the happiness you deserve." After he left, Zelda sat staring at the envelope. $200 combined with her savings and Emmett's would allow them to file their homestead claim much sooner than anticipated. They could buy building supplies, livestock, seeds for planting. It was a foundation for their future. When Emmett came in from his work that evening, she showed him the money and explained about Marcus Montgomery's visit. His reaction was immediate and characteristic. "That money is yours, Zelda. You do not have to contribute it to our homestead if you do not want to. You could keep it for security in case you ever need it." "I want to build our future together," she replied. "This money came from something painful, but we can use it to create something good. That feels right to me." He kissed her forehead. "Then we will use it wisely, and we will make sure every dollar works toward building the life we want." The wedding day arrived cold but clear, with the first snow of the season holding off long enough for the ceremony. The church was full this time, not with people anticipating scandal, but with genuine friends who wanted to celebrate the couple's happiness. The Rogers family occupied the front pew, with Lily dabbing at her eyes even before the ceremony began. The ranch hands filled several more rows, scrubbed clean and wearing their best clothes, looking uncomfortable in the formal setting but pleased to be included. Zelda walked down the aisle alone by choice. She did not need anyone to give her away because she was choosing this for herself, freely and completely. And there at the altar stood Emmett, tall and handsome in new clothes, his face radiating joy as he watched her approach. No doubt, no hesitation, just certainty and love. The traveling preacher performed the ceremony, the same one who had waited vainly for Richard Montgomery months earlier. This time, there were no awkward pauses or pitying glances. Emmett spoke his vows in a clear, strong voice, promising to love, honor, and cherish Zelda for the rest of his life. Zelda spoke hers with equal conviction, knowing she meant every word. When the preacher pronounced them married, Emmett kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart swell. This was right. This was real. This was the life she was meant to have. The celebration afterward was raucous and joyful, held in the barn at the Double R Ranch since the house was too small for everyone. Lily and several women from town had prepared food, though Zelda had contributed several dishes herself, despite protests that a bride should not work on her wedding day. Tables were laden with roasted meat, fresh bread, pies, and cakes. Someone produced a fiddle, and dancing began as the sun set and lanterns were lit to illuminate the barn. Emmett led Zelda in a simple waltz, and even though neither of them were skilled dancers, it did not matter. They moved together with the ease of two people who understood each other deeply, who could communicate without words. "Happy?" Emmett asked softly. "More than I ever imagined possible," Zelda replied. "Thank you for giving me this." "I did not give you anything," he said, echoing his words from months earlier. "You earned this happiness yourself. I am just lucky enough to be part of it." They spent their wedding night in the small room off the kitchen, which suddenly felt less like a temporary space and more like the place where their married life began. It was simple and imperfect, but it was theirs. Over the winter months, they continued working at the Double R Ranch while planning for their future homestead. Emmett spent his evenings sketching plans for a cabin, calculating how much lumber they would need, determining where to locate the structure for best protection from winter winds while maintaining access to water. Zelda inventoried what supplies they would need for the first year, making lists of everything from dishes to tools to seeds. Sam Rogers was supportive of their plans, though sorry to lose two of his best workers. "When spring comes and you file your claim, I will help however I can," he promised. "You will need assistance building the cabin, and I can spare some men for a few days. Consider it a wedding gift." In February, during a brief warm spell, Emmett took Zelda to see the land he had been eyeing. It was a beautiful piece of property with a stream running through it, surrounded by pine forest with a natural meadow that would be perfect for grazing cattle. Standing there in the snow, Zelda could envision their cabin, a barn, corrals for horses, fields for planting. "We could be happy here," she said. "We will be happy here," Emmett corrected. "We will build something that lasts, something we can be proud of." They filed their homestead claim in March as soon as the land office opened for the season. The process required them to promise they would improve the land, build a dwelling, and live there for 5 years before receiving full ownership. It was a significant commitment, but neither of them hesitated. In April, with the help of Sam Rogers and several of the ranch hands, they began building their cabin. It was hard, physical work, but there was satisfaction in watching the structure take shape, walls rising from the foundation they had laid. Zelda worked alongside the men, helping haul logs and drive nails, her hands blistering despite the gloves she wore. By June, exactly 1 year after she had been left at the altar, they moved into their completed cabin. It was small, just 2 rooms with a loft for sleeping, but it was solidly built and warm. They had a wood stove for cooking and heating, 2 windows that let in light, and a door that latched securely against weather and wildlife. Their first night in the cabin, they lay in their bed in the loft, listening to the sounds of the wilderness around them. Wolves howled in the distance. The stream burbled over rocks. The wind whispered through the pine trees. "Are you afraid?" Emmett asked. "No," Zelda answered truthfully. "I have never felt safer. We have a long road ahead of us. Building a ranch from nothing is not going to be easy." "Nothing worth having is easy," she replied. "You taught me that." He pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. This was home, not because of the cabin itself, but because of the man beside her and the life they were building together. The first year on their homestead was challenging in ways they had anticipated, and some they had not. They purchased 6 head of cattle with their savings, foundation stock for what they hoped would eventually be a substantial herd. They planted a large garden, and Zelda spent the summer tending it while Emmett built a barn and corrals. They worked from sunrise to sunset, collapsing into bed each night exhausted but satisfied. In August, they returned to the Double R Ranch for a visit and found Lily Rogers engaged to one of the ranch hands, a quiet young man named Peter who clearly adored her. Zelda and Lily laughed together about how both of them had found love on the ranch, how sometimes the best things in life came from unexpected places. "I never thanked you properly," Lily said. "You saved me when you came to work at the ranch. I was drowning and you pulled me out. Now I have the energy to do what I love, working with the horses, and Peter supports that. He does not expect me to be something I am not." "That is what real love looks like," Zelda agreed. As autumn approached, they prepared for their first winter alone on the homestead. They had stored food, cut wood, and made sure their cabin was sealed against the cold. Montana winters were brutal, and they would be isolated for months, but they were ready. The winter was indeed harsh, with snow piling higher than the windows and temperatures dropping so low that water froze solid within minutes of being brought inside. But inside the cabin, with the stove radiating heat and Zelda and Emmett working together on various projects, it felt cozy rather than confining. During the long winter evenings, Zelda sewed clothes and quilts while Emmett worked on leather tack and other necessary equipment. They talked about their plans for the coming year, the improvements they wanted to make, their dreams for the future. In late February, during a particularly fierce snowstorm, Zelda realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before telling Emmett. When she shared the news, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for: joy, excitement, and a tenderness that made her eyes fill with tears. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A child who will grow up here, who will know this land is home from the very beginning." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "I have never been happier," he replied. "You have given me everything, Zelda. A home, a purpose, and now a family." "We gave each other everything," she corrected. "This is ours together." The baby was due in September, which meant Zelda would have the summer to prepare while still being able to help with necessary work around the homestead. As spring arrived and the snow melted, they planted a larger garden than the previous year, knowing they would need more food with a baby coming. In May, they made the journey to Hecla for supplies and encountered Richard Montgomery on the street. He looked diminished somehow, his expensive clothes replaced by plain work attire, his face lacking the arrogant confidence he had always carried. He saw Zelda and froze, clearly not expecting to encounter her. Emmett tensed beside her, but Zelda squeezed his hand reassuringly. She felt nothing looking at Richard, no anger, no pain, not even satisfaction at his reduced circumstances. He was simply a person she used to know, someone who had briefly touched her life but held no power over her anymore. Richard opened his mouth as if to speak, then seemed to think better of it. He nodded briefly and crossed the street, disappearing into the general store. The entire encounter lasted less than a minute, but it was significant in its insignificance. The man who had once seemed so important, whose abandonment had felt like the end of the world, was now just another stranger in a small town. "Are you all right?" Emmett asked. "I am perfect," Zelda replied, and meant it. They completed their shopping and returned to the homestead, where life continued its steady rhythm. Summer brought hard work and long days, but also the satisfaction of watching their cattle herd grow, their garden flourish, and their home become more established. Zelda's pregnancy progressed normally, and she continued working despite Emmett's protests that she should rest more. "Women have been having babies while working for thousands of years," she told him. "I am not fragile." "I know you are not fragile," he replied. "But you are precious to me, and I want to make sure you and the baby are safe." His concern was touching rather than overbearing, and Zelda appreciated that he cared without trying to control her. They had built their relationship on mutual respect, and that foundation remained strong even as they navigated the new territory of impending parenthood. In early September, during a golden afternoon when the aspen trees were just beginning to turn yellow, Zelda went into labor. Emmett rode hard to fetch the midwife from Hecla, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. By the time they returned, Zelda's contractions were strong and regular. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Emmett paced outside the cabin, occasionally allowed in to hold Zelda's hand and whisper encouragement, but mostly left to worry and pray that everything would be all right. When a baby's cry finally pierced the afternoon air, he nearly collapsed with relief. Mrs. Henderson opened the door, smiling. "You have a healthy son, Mr. O'Brien, and your wife did beautifully." Emmett rushed inside to find Zelda propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the quilts she had sewn during the winter. The baby had dark hair like his mother and was wailing with impressive lung capacity. "Meet your son," Zelda said softly. Emmett sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at the baby with wonder. "He is perfect. We should name him," Zelda said. "What do you think of Daniel?" "It was my father's name." "Daniel O'Brien," Emmett said, testing how it sounded. "I like it. Daniel it is." The baby immediately became the center of their world, though not to the exclusion of their work. Zelda recovered quickly from the birth and was soon back to managing the household while caring for Daniel. Emmett built a cradle and positioned it near wherever Zelda was working so she could keep an eye on their son while still accomplishing necessary tasks. Life fell into a new rhythm that included midnight feedings and diaper changes, alongside the regular work of running a homestead. It was exhausting but fulfilling, and both Zelda and Emmett marveled at how their capacity for love had expanded to include this tiny person who depended on them for everything. Winter came again, their second on the homestead, and this time they were more experienced and better prepared. They had more food stored, more wood cut, and a sense of confidence born from having survived one Montana winter already. Daniel was a happy baby who slept well and seemed untroubled by the isolation, probably because he knew nothing else. In the spring, they celebrated their second wedding anniversary and Daniel's first steps, which he took while trying to reach his father across the cabin floor. They also welcomed their first successful calf births, which meant their herd was growing naturally rather than just through purchases. The summer of 1885 was prosperous. Their garden produced abundantly. Their cattle remained healthy. They even managed to sell some beef to Sam Rogers, who was happy to support their growing operation. Daniel grew into a sturdy toddler who loved following his father around the property, babbling in his own language about the horses and cattle. In August, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. The news brought joy tempered by the knowledge that another baby would mean even more work, but they welcomed the expansion of their family. This child would be born in spring, during the busiest time of year for the ranch, but they would manage. They always did. The pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Zelda knew what to expect. She continued her work throughout the winter, with Daniel as her constant companion. He was a good-natured child who entertained himself playing with wooden toys Emmett carved during long winter evenings. Their daughter was born in April 1886, during a rainstorm that made travel to fetch Mrs. Henderson treacherous but manageable. The birth was quicker than Daniel's, and soon they were holding a tiny girl with blonde hair and her father's hazel eyes. "She looks like spring," Zelda said, gazing at their daughter. "What about May? Simple and sweet." "May O'Brien," Emmett agreed. "It suits her." Two children made life even busier but also richer. Daniel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything despite being barely 2 years old himself. The cabin felt full in the best possible way, with baby sounds and toddler laughter mixing with the sounds of domestic life. That summer, Sam Rogers visited with news that he was selling part of the Double R Ranch to his daughter Lily and her husband Peter, who wanted to start their own operation. "Figured I would help them get established while I am still alive and able," Sam explained. No sense making them wait for an inheritance. It was evidence of the kind of family support that Zelda had never experienced with her own relatives. She thought briefly about her aunt and uncle in Hecla, whom she had not seen since leaving their home nearly 3 years earlier. She bore them no ill will, but neither did she feel any particular connection. Her real family was here: Emmett, Daniel, May, and the community they had built through their work and relationships. As their 3rd year on the homestead progressed, they continued making improvements. Emmett built a larger barn and added more corrals. They purchased additional cattle and even acquired a few chickens, which provided fresh eggs and entertainment for Daniel, who loved collecting the eggs each morning. Their garden expanded to include fruit trees, which would take years to mature but represented their commitment to this land as a permanent home. In the fall, they butchered one of their steers and shared the meat with Sam Rogers and several neighbors who had helped them over the years. It was a way of giving back, acknowledging that their success had been built not in isolation, but as part of a community. Winter came again, the third they had spent in the cabin, and it felt almost routine now. They had systems in place for managing the cold, maintaining the livestock, and keeping everyone healthy and occupied. Daniel was old enough to help with small tasks, and he took his responsibilities seriously, carefully feeding the chickens and bringing in kindling for the stove. In February, Zelda realized she was pregnant for the third time. This was unexpected as May was barely a year old, but they adjusted their plans accordingly. Another mouth to feed meant they needed to expand their operations even more, but it also meant their family was growing, their legacy on this land becoming more substantial. 3 children, Emmett said wonderingly. "We are building a tribe. We are building a future," Zelda corrected. "These children will inherit what we create here. They will carry it forward." The baby was due in October, which meant Zelda would have late summer and early fall to prepare while still managing the busy harvest season. It was not ideal timing, but when was there ever an ideal time to have a baby on a working ranch? Mrs. Henderson joked when she came for the birth that she might as well move onto their property given how frequently she was needed. This time it was another boy, born on a crisp October evening with the aspen trees golden against the darkening sky. "What about Samuel?" Zelda suggested, thinking of Sam Rogers, who had been such a good friend to them. "We could call him Sam." "Samuel O'Brien," Emmett agreed. "Sam will be honored." And he was. When they told him the baby was named after him, Sam Rogers got misty-eyed and gruff, muttering about foolishness while clearly being deeply touched. "That boy better grow up to be a good man," he said. "He has a lot to live up to with that name." "He will have good examples," Zelda assured him. With 3 children under 4 years old, life was chaotic but full. Zelda often went to bed exhausted, but it was a satisfied exhaustion. She and Emmett had built something real and lasting. Their homestead was thriving. Their children were healthy and happy. Their love had deepened through years of working together, supporting each other, and building their shared dream. On their 4th wedding anniversary, Emmett surprised her with a gift. A new rocking chair he had built himself, smooth and sturdy, perfect for rocking babies or enjoying quiet moments on the porch. It was beautiful in its simplicity, made with care and love. "It is perfect," Zelda said, running her hand along the polished wood. "You made this. Been working on it for months whenever I had spare time. Wanted you to have something special, something that was not just practical but beautiful too." She kissed him, thinking about how far they had come from that day in Hecla when she sat on a bench outside the general store, believing her life was over. That moment of complete despair had been the beginning of something better than she could have imagined. "You ever think about that day?" she asked. "When you first saw me in Hecla?" "I think about it often," Emmett replied. "I think about how close I came to just riding past, minding my own business. But something made me stop and talk to you. I will be grateful for that impulse for the rest of my life." "I think it was fate," Zelda said. "Richard leaving me at the altar set everything in motion. It freed me to find you to build this life. I would never have had the courage to break that engagement myself, even though it was wrong. I needed him to make the choice so I could discover what I really wanted." "Which is what?" Emmett asked, though his smile suggested he knew the answer. This, you, our children, this land, a life built on real love and partnership rather than social convention and economic necessity. They sat together in the new rocking chair, watching the sun set over their property. Daniel was chasing chickens in the yard under the watchful eye of their dog, a mutt named Bear who had wandered onto their property 2 years ago and decided to stay. May was playing with a doll on the porch steps. Baby Sam was sleeping in the cabin. This was success, Zelda thought. Not wealth or social status, but this. Family, land, love, and the knowledge that they had built it all with their own hands and determination. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and family growth. In 1888, Zelda gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Grace, which brought their family to 6 children. The cabin was officially too small, so that summer they began construction on a larger house, building it slowly as they had time and resources. Daniel, now 5, helped his father with simple tasks, learning the skills he would need to eventually run the ranch himself. May, at 3, followed her mother everywhere, learning to cook, clean, and manage a household. The younger children tumbled around together, happy and secure in the only home they had ever known. Sam Rogers visited regularly, often bringing Lily and Peter and their own growing family. The children played together while the adults discussed ranch business, shared news from town, and enjoyed the companionship of people who understood their way of life. The new house was completed in 1889, a substantial structure with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a proper dining room, and even a parlor for receiving guests. It represented 6 years of hard work and careful saving, and moving into it felt like a milestone in their journey. "Remember when we lived in a cabin with 2 rooms and 1 baby?" Zelda asked as they unpacked their belongings in the new house. "Remember when you lived in a room off someone else's kitchen, working for wages and wondering what would become of you?" Emmett countered. "That was a different lifetime ago," Zelda said. "I am not even the same person anymore." "You are the same person," Emmett disagreed. "You were always this strong, this capable. You just needed the opportunity to show it." In 1890, they celebrated their 6th wedding anniversary and the completion of 5 years on their homestead, which meant they could file for full ownership of the land. The property that had been theirs to use and improve was now legally and permanently theirs. It was a profound moment, standing in the land office in Hecla with the deed in their hands, knowing that they had fulfilled every requirement and had earned this ownership through their own labor. That evening, they gathered their 6 children around the dinner table in their new house and explained what the day meant. Daniel, now 7, understood that the land would someday be his to care for. The other children were too young to fully grasp the significance, but they sensed it was important and paid attention. "This ranch is your heritage," Emmett told them. "Your mother and I built it from nothing, and we built it for you. Someday, you will make your own choices about what to do with your lives, but you will always have this place as your foundation." Life continued its steady progression. The children grew. The ranch prospered. Zelda and Emmett's love matured into something deep and unshakable, tested by hardship and proven strong through years of partnership. They still stole moments alone when possible, sitting on the porch after the children were asleep, talking about their day and their dreams. In 1892, Zelda turned 31, and Emmett surprised her with a trip to Butte, just the 2 of them, leaving the children with Sam Rogers and Lily for 3 days. It was the first time they had been alone together for more than a few hours since May's birth, 6 years earlier. They stayed in a hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked the streets of the city without the constant demands of children and ranch work. It was wonderful and strange, and by the second day they both admitted they missed their children and their home. "I guess we are ranch people through and through," Emmett said with a laugh. "Even a nice hotel cannot compete with our own bed and the sound of children sleeping down the hall." "I would not trade our life for anything," Zelda agreed. They returned home to find everything had run smoothly in their absence, which was both reassuring and slightly humbling. The world continued even when they were not there to manage every detail. In 1893, tragedy touched their lives when Sam Rogers died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68. The funeral was well attended, with people traveling from all over the territory to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by many. Zelda and Emmett grieved deeply, knowing they had lost not just a friend but a mentor who had helped shape their lives. Lily and Peter took over full operation of the Double R, which was now legally theirs. They invited Zelda and Emmett to visit anytime, maintaining the friendship their fathers had built. The children played together, and the two families supported each other through the challenges of ranch life. The years rolled forward. Daniel grew into a young man who loved ranching as much as his father, already talking about expanding their cattle operation and implementing new techniques he had read about. May became an accomplished seamstress like her mother, with a particular talent for creating beautiful clothes from simple materials. The younger children developed their own personalities and interests, each contributing to the family in their own way. In 1896, Zelda and Emmett celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary. Sitting on their porch in the rocking chair Emmett had built years earlier, they watched the sun set over the ranch they had built from dreams and determination. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if Richard had not left you at that altar?" Emmett asked. Zelda considered the question. "Sometimes. I think I would have been comfortable but never truly happy. He would have treated me like property, something he owned rather than a partner. I would have had children, but I would not have had this sense of purpose and accomplishment. Everything I have now I earned. That matters more than I can express." "You earned all of this before you ever met me," Emmett said. "I just had the good fortune to be there when you needed someone to see your worth." "You did more than see my worth," Zelda replied. "You helped me see it myself. When I was sitting on that bench in Hecla, I felt worthless, discarded. I could not imagine how I would survive, let alone build a good life. But you looked at me and saw possibility. That changed everything." Their oldest daughter, Emma, came out onto the porch, now 8 years old and full of questions about everything. "Mama, Papa, are you going to sit out here all night?" "Just enjoying the evening, sweetheart," Emmett replied. "Are your siblings settled?" "Daniel is reading to the little ones. May is finishing some sewing. Grace is already asleep." Emma climbed into her father's lap, something she was getting almost too big for, but neither of them was ready to give up yet. "Tell me the story about how you met." It had become the children's favorite story, one they requested regularly. Zelda and Emmett exchanged a smile, and Emmett began the familiar tale, simplified for young ears but containing the essential truth. "Your mother was having the worst day of her life, sitting on a bench in town, feeling like the world had ended. And I rode into Hecla needing supplies, and I saw her there, and something told me to stop and talk to her." "And you fell in love," Emma said confidently. "Eventually," Zelda said. "First, your father offered me hope. Love came later, built on friendship and respect." "But it is true love," Emma insisted. "The best kind." "Yes," Zelda agreed, reaching over to squeeze Emmett's hand. "The very best kind, the kind that is built on choice and partnership, not just romance and fancy words." Emma seemed satisfied with this and ran back inside to share the story with her siblings, as though they had not all heard it 100 times before. Zelda and Emmett returned to their peaceful contemplation of the evening. "We should tell them the whole story someday," Emmett said. "About Richard and the humiliation and how close you came to having nowhere to go." "When they are older," Zelda agreed. "When they can understand that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best outcomes, that being broken open can let better things in." In 1898, when Daniel turned 15, he asked if he could start taking on more responsibility for the ranch operations. Emmett agreed, beginning to teach his son the business side of ranching, not just the physical work. They rode the property together, discussing plans for expansion, talking about which cattle to keep for breeding and which to sell, making decisions as partners. Watching them, Zelda felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They were raising children who understood hard work, who valued family, and who had strong foundations to build their own lives on. Whatever challenges those children faced, they would face them with the tools and confidence their parents had given them. May began courting a young man from a neighboring ranch, a respectful boy named Thomas who clearly adored her. Zelda remembered being May's age and thinking she would marry Richard, remembered how young and naive she had been. She hoped her daughter would make better choices, but more than that, she hoped May would feel empowered to make her own choices rather than simply accepting what society or family dictated. In 1899, as the century drew to a close, Zelda turned 38 and Emmett turned 41. They had been married for 15 years and had built a successful ranch, raised 6 children, and created a life that exceeded anything either of them had imagined when they first met on that long-ago day in Hecla. 15 years, Zelda mused on their anniversary. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like no time at all. Time is strange that way, Emmett agreed, but I would not change a moment of it. Not even the hard parts, especially not the hard parts. They taught us what we were capable of. They hosted a large celebration for their anniversary, inviting friends and neighbors from throughout the territory. Lily and Peter came with their family. The church community attended. Ranch hands who had worked for them over the years made the journey to celebrate. It was a testament to the relationships they had built, the respect they had earned. During the celebration, someone asked Zelda to tell the story of how she and Emmett met. Standing in front of friends and family, holding her husband's hand, she told the true version, the complete one that included pain and humiliation alongside hope and love. 16 years ago, I stood in a church in this town, wearing a wedding dress I had sewn myself, waiting for a man who never came. I thought my life was over. I thought I had nothing and was worth nothing. She paused, looking around at the assembled faces, but I was wrong. I had everything I needed inside myself. I just needed the freedom to choose differently and the courage to build something new. She turned to Emmett. This man gave me that freedom by offering me hope when I most needed it. He did not rescue me because I do not need rescuing. But he partnered with me to build something neither of us could have created alone. That is what real love looks like. That is what I want our children to understand about relationships and life. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and laughter. The children played together, running through the house and yard with the boundless energy of youth. Zelda and Emmett danced together, moving in comfortable synchronicity, 2 people who had become partners in every sense of the word. As the new century dawned in 1900, they stood together on their property, watching the sunrise and thinking about everything that had led them to this moment. 20 years had passed since Zelda sat on that bench in Hecla. 17 years had passed since Emmett rode into town looking for supplies and found something infinitely more valuable. 15 years had passed since they exchanged vows in a church, promising to build a life together. They had kept those promises. They had built not just a ranch but a legacy, not just a family but a foundation that would last for generations. Their children were growing into good people who understood the value of hard work, honesty, and genuine love. Their land was prosperous and well-maintained. Their marriage was strong, tested by time and proven true. "Do you have any regrets?" Zelda asked as they watched the sun climb higher into the sky, illuminating their property in golden light. "Not a single one," Emmett replied. "You?" "Only that I wasted time feeling worthless when Richard left me. I should have realized sooner that being left at the altar was not an ending but a beginning." "You realized it soon enough," Emmett said, "and everything happened exactly as it needed to." They returned to the house, where their children were beginning to wake and start their day. There was breakfast to prepare, animals to feed, chores to complete. The work of running a ranch never truly ended, but they had never minded that. Work gave life purpose and structure. Daniel announced at breakfast that he wanted to start his own homestead on adjacent land, building his own operation while still contributing to the family ranch. Emmett and Zelda agreed to help him file the claim and get established, proud that their son was ready to take on such responsibility at just 17. May and Thomas announced their engagement, planning a summer wedding that would take place in the same church where Zelda had been left at the altar and later married Emmett. Zelda felt no sadness about this, only joy that her daughter had found genuine love with a good man. The younger children were still finding their paths, but they had time. Emma showed interest in teaching, Grace loved animals and talked about becoming a veterinarian, and the boys were still young enough that their interests changed weekly. Life continued its steady, satisfying rhythm. Seasons turned, children grew, the ranch prospered. Zelda and Emmett worked side by side, year after year, their partnership deepening with time. They weathered difficult years when drought or harsh winters threatened their livelihood. They celebrated good years when everything went right and they could expand their operations. In 1905, at their 20th wedding anniversary celebration, Emmett gave a speech that brought tears to many eyes, including Zelda's. 20 years ago, I married the strongest woman I have ever known. She had been through something that would have destroyed a lesser person, but instead of being broken by it, she used it as fuel to build something better. Everything we have, everything our children will inherit, exists because Zelda chose to keep going when most people would have given up. I am honored to be her partner, and I thank God every day for the impulse that made me stop and talk to a woman sitting on a bench, looking like she carried the weight of the world. Zelda stood and wrapped her arms around him, holding him close while their children and friends applauded. "You saved me," she whispered in his ear. "No," he whispered back. "You saved yourself. I just got to watch." The years continued to pass, bringing the natural changes and challenges of life. They became grandparents when May had her first child in 1907. They saw Daniel successfully establish his own ranch. They navigated the complexities of aging, dealing with the inevitable aches and pains that came with decades of hard physical labor. But through everything, their love remained constant. They still sat on the porch in the evening, still talked about their day and their dreams, still reached for each other's hands in moments of joy or sorrow. The wild passion of early love had mellowed into something deeper and more sustaining, a love built on decades of partnership and shared experience. In 1910, at their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered to honor them. The house they had built was full of noise and laughter. 3 generations celebrating the couple who had started it all. Standing in her living room, surrounded by family, Zelda thought back to that girl in the white dress, standing alone in a church, believing her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, all the good things that were waiting on the other side of her humiliation. But perhaps it was better that she had not known. Perhaps the journey itself, with all its uncertainty and challenges, was what had made everything sweeter in the end. Emmett found her in a quiet moment, pulling her aside from the celebration. "What are you thinking about?" "How lucky I am," Zelda replied. "How that awful day led to all of this. How being left at the altar with nothing was actually the moment everything began." "You were never left with nothing," Emmett said. "You always had yourself, your strength, your determination. Those things were always yours. I just happened to be there to remind you of them. And then you said those words that changed everything." "What words?" "Then you are free to choose me," Zelda quoted. "You gave me choice when I thought I had none. You showed me that being free, even if it felt terrible at the moment, was actually a gift." They kissed. A gentle kiss between people who had kissed thousands of times over 25 years, but it still held magic, still felt significant. The celebration continued around them, but in that moment, they were alone together as they had been in the beginning. 2 people who had chosen each other and built a life worth celebrating. Years later, in 1920, Zelda and Emmett celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. They were both in their late 50s now, their children fully grown with families of their own, their grandchildren numerous and beloved. The ranch they had built from nothing was now a substantial operation, managed primarily by Daniel with help from his younger brothers. They had slowed down, no longer doing the heavy physical labor themselves, but remaining involved in decision-making and enjoying the fruits of their decades of hard work. They had earned their rest, though neither of them was particularly good at being idle. On their anniversary, they returned to Hecla, walking the streets that had been the backdrop for the beginning of their story. The town had grown and changed over the decades, but the bench where they first met was still there outside the general store, now somewhat weathered but still solid. They sat down on it together, and Emmett put his arm around Zelda's shoulders. "Remember sitting here that day?" he asked. "How could I forget?" Zelda replied. "It was the worst and best day of my life. The worst because of what Richard did, the best because it led to meeting you." "Do you think you would have left him eventually if he had not left you first?" Zelda considered carefully. "I do not know. I hope I would have had the courage, but I might not have. Women of my generation were taught to endure, not to choose. It took being forced into freedom to show me what freedom could mean." "You would have found your way eventually," Emmett said confidently. "You are too strong to have accepted a lifetime of being undervalued." They sat in comfortable silence, watching people move about their business. A young couple walked past, clearly arguing about something, and Zelda found herself hoping they would find their way to the kind of partnership she and Emmett had built. "We should head back," Emmett finally said. "The family will be waiting for us." They returned to the ranch, where indeed their children and grandchildren had gathered for a celebration. There was food and music and joy, the hallmarks of a family that loved each other and knew how to celebrate life's milestones. That evening, as the guests departed and the house grew quiet, Zelda and Emmett returned to their porch, to the rocking chair he had built decades ago that had become their favorite spot for ending each day. "What a life we have built," Zelda said softly. "What a life you saved," Emmett countered. "That day I offered you a ride out here, you were drowning, but you grabbed hold of that lifeline and pulled yourself up. Everything that came after was because of your strength." "No," Zelda said firmly. Everything that came after was because you saw me, really saw me when I felt invisible. You offered me hope when you could have just ridden past. That kindness changed the trajectory of my entire life. Then we saved each other, Emmett said, pulling her close, because you changed my life too. Before you, I was just drifting, working where there was work, never staying anywhere long enough to build anything permanent. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something that would last. They rocked gently in the chair, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sounds of cattle and horses settling for the night drifted on the evening breeze. The ranch was peaceful, prosperous, everything they had worked so hard to create. I love you, Zelda said. I have loved you since that first day, though I did not recognize it then. You showed me what love could be when it was real. I love you too, Emmett replied. You are everything I never knew I needed. They remained there until the stars filled the sky and the night grew cold. Two people who had built a life together from nothing but hope, hard work, and genuine love. They had faced challenges and overcome them. They had raised children and seen those children thrive. They had created something lasting that would continue long after they were gone. Zelda thought one final time about that girl in the white dress, standing alone and humiliated in a church. She wished she could tell her that everything would be all right, better than all right. That being left at the altar was not the end of her story, but the beginning of her real life. That the pain she felt in that moment would fade, replaced by joy she could not yet imagine. But that girl had become this woman through living her own journey, learning her own lessons, finding her own strength. The path had been difficult, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. Come on, Emmett said eventually, standing and extending his hand. Let us go to bed. Tomorrow is another day, and we have grandchildren coming for lunch. Zelda took his hand and let him help her up, their movements slower than they used to be, but still synchronized after decades of partnership. They walked into their house together, closing the door on the night and on this chapter of their story. But the story was not over. It would continue through their children and grandchildren, through the ranch they had built and the values they had instilled. Every person who worked hard to build something meaningful. Every woman who chose her own path despite societal expectations. Every man who treated his partner with respect and genuine love carried forward the legacy they had created. And somewhere in Hecla, Montana, that bench remained outside the general store, a silent witness to the day. A broken woman and a kind cowboy had changed each other's lives forever. It stood as a reminder that endings are often beginnings, that humiliation can lead to liberation, and that sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the first day of your real life. Zelda Reynolds O'Brien had been left at the altar with nothing. But that nothing had become everything, because it had given her the freedom to choose differently, to build authentically, and to love truly. And she had chosen Emmett, chosen partnership, chosen a life of hard work and genuine connection over the comfortable prison of a loveless but secure marriage. In the end, being left at the altar had been the greatest gift Richard Montgomery could have given her, though he certainly had not meant it as such. He had freed her to find something real, something lasting, something worth the decades of work it took to build and maintain. And she had found it, in a dusty cowboy with kind eyes who had looked at her, and seen not a woman destroyed, but a woman freed to become who she was always meant to be. That was the real story, the true story, the one worth telling and retelling until everyone understood that sometimes you have to lose everything to gain the chance to build something better. And Zelda had built something extraordinary, not just a ranch but a life, not just a family but a legacy, Not just a marriage, but a true partnership that had lasted and deepened over 35 years and counting. As they lay in bed that night, Emmett's arm around her waist, Zelda's head on his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat, she whispered one final truth into the darkness. "Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for letting me," he whispered back. And they fell asleep together, as they had every night for 35 years. Two people who had started with nothing but hope and built everything that mattered. The ranch would continue. Their children would thrive. Their grandchildren would carry forward the values and lessons they had learned. And the story of how they met, how they built their life together, how being left at the altar had led to finding true love, would be told and retold through generations. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments, if you have the courage to keep going and the wisdom to choose differently when given the chance. Zelda Reynolds had been left at the altar with nothing, until a cowboy named Emmett O'Brien said, "Then you are free to choose me." And she did, and that choice made all the difference.